Let's talk about it all with the latest. My guest tonight, Jamil Jaffer, the founder and director of the National Security Institute, George Mason. He's up late with me tonight here on the Final Five. Welcome back, Jamil. It's good to see you again.
Thanks for having me on.
Let's talk about the situation as it unfolds. Once again, another delay, another pushback. The ceasefire remains in effect, but to what end?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, the working theory is that you have a ceasefire in place. The U.S. is going to stop bombing Iran so that the Strait of Hormuz can reopen. Oil can flow through it. Oil prices come down. The U.S. is under less economic pressure. And ultimately, Iran gets arrested in the bombing so they can negotiate to get to a final status of the conflict. The problem is Iran and the U.S. don't have a meeting of the minds on what a final status looks like. But even worse, Jim, we don't have a meeting of the minds on the ceasefire itself, because for the 14 days or whatever the ceasefire has been in place, Iran has not reopened the Strait of Hormuz. There have been no ships transiting that space other than ones that benefit them that would actually lower the price of oil. So while the price of oil has gone up and down, it hasn't been because Iran's opened the Strait. It's been because there's a hope that they might reopen the Strait, and that hasn't happened. And yet we're extending the ceasefire. It makes no sense.
There's been a lot of talk about what page U.S. officials are on, but more critically here, it looks like there's a lot of confusion as to what page Iranian officials are on, because you have some leaders who have one take on the situation. Maybe they want to resolve it. Maybe they want to strike a deal, and others who are very defiant of the U.S. here.
Well, look, but that's not a justification for not having a national position and not being able to negotiate. And it's no reason for the United States to say you have to have a national position. We can take that point of view and say, look, if you don't want a ceasefire, that's fine. We're going to start bombing again. But the president, in a kind of a bizarre move, is like, we'll extend the ceasefire so that Iran can come up with a consolidated position. They haven't had long enough to do that. These 14 days has been in place. But on top of that, they're not doing what they agreed to do as part of the ceasefire, which is reopen the Strait. Yeah. So I don't get why we continue to move forward with a ceasefire that is only working for one party, the Iranians.
President Trump has been adamant, as you know, all along, and this goes back to his first administration. He doesn't want to see Iran with a nuclear weapon. He said they're never going to get one in the first place. So when we talk about a deal, like, what would a deal look like if the president has drawn that hard and fast line on nuclear weapons?
Well, the way to ensure Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon is to do what we've done with every other country in the world and say you cannot have domestic nuclear enrichment. It was a huge mistake for the Obama administration to give in on that. It would be a huge mistake for the Trump administration to give in on that. They're talking about maybe a 20-year timeline. The answer is just no, you don't get that. And to negotiate with Iran, what they say is, look, if you want to do a deal, that's the beginning part of the deal. There will be no nuclear enrichment. And if you don't like that, well, then the bombs will continue. And Iran doesn't want that either. The problem is the president has given them a ceasefire. They're not doing their part. We've now blockaded their ports, but we're not restarting bombing. So the question is, what's going to drive them to the table to get the deal the president wants? That's what's still unclear here.
And the big question, too, is in terms of how the president wants to get there. And we know the social media post from about a week or so ago where he was promising the end of a civilization. He certainly has changed that stance where he's talking about the civilian infrastructure, the bridges, the power plants. And a lot of people have said, well, look, those are serving dual usage. They're not just for civilians. They're being used in the process of carrying out what the U.S. has deemed to be illegal here.
Well, look, it is perfectly appropriate to strike a power plant or a bridge if it's dual use, if it's being used by the military. There's nothing illegal or against the laws of war about that. Now, when you talk about destroying all the bridges and all the power plants and ending a civilization, that becomes really problematic. And the problem is the president used that tone and, in fact, used some of those words in public on Truth Social. That's where the real problem comes from. There's no problem with striking bridges. We do it all the time in war. There's no problem with striking power plants. We do it all the time in war. It's when you're targeting civilian infrastructure without a military benefit that becomes a problem. If you talk about destroying all of them, then it suggests that you're going to do that without a proper justification. That's when you get into trouble. And look, at the end of the day here, though, is bombing can continue. There are plenty of military targets left in Iran to hit. The president doesn't want to continue bombing. Okay, that's fine. But then don't be surprised when the Iranians think that you're not in a position to negotiate and that they have the upper hand. Now, the president's trying to get leverage back by putting in place this blockade. We'll see if that works. But the real way the blockade will work is if you blockade the Iranian ports and escort ships through the Straits so that our oil prices can get lowered. All those hundreds of ships that are sitting inside the Gulf waiting to come out can come out. That would actually increase pressure on the Iranians because then their oil isn't getting out. other oil is getting out, and that's a real problem for them. The problem is we're not doing that last part.
And we're also going to see, too, with the upheaval now, with the leadership of the Navy, with Secretary Phelan being ousted today, Hung Kao being brought in now. We'll see what changes and what we learn from that abrupt change in the middle of wartime. Jamil Jaffer joining us here on the Final Five. Jamil, thanks. Great to see you again.
Thanks, Jim.
We appreciate you.